Hey guys, tonight we re-stepping into a place that your nose will regret before your brain has time to catch up. Imagine cobblestone streets under your feet, stone walls towering on either side, and a haze of smoke and mystery drifting in from somewhere you can't see. You take a deep breath because that's what you do when you arrive somewhere new and instantly regret it. It's warm, damp, and carries the combined force of about 15 things that, individually, you might tolerate, but together, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And in the comments, tell me your location and the exact local time. Right, now I love knowing where in the world you're re-listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together, slipping quietly into a world you can smell long before you see it. You start walking. The street is narrow, the kind where if you stretch your arms, you can almost touch both walls. Overhead, a faded strip of cloth hangs between the buildings, meant to shade the vendors below, but really just collecting dust and trapping the air. You pass a man selling figs from a wooden cart. They're plump, sweet-looking, and somehow sticky in a way that makes you suspect they've been here for days. The first thing you notice is that everyone smells like something. It's not necessarily bad, just distinct. The woman balancing a basket on her head. She smells faintly of olive oil and rosemary. The old man sitting in the doorway, whittling a piece of wood, smoke and wool. You realize there's no such thing as unscented here. In a time without deodorant, without plumbing, without scented laundry detergent, the human body simply exists as part of the city's perfume. Somewhere nearby, a donkey brays. Its hooves clack against the stones, and as it passes, you catch a gust of warm, earthy manure scent. The owner doesn't notice he's been smelling that for years. Historians still argue whether ancient cities were actually filthy beyond belief, or whether modern noses are simply too sensitive. Some claim that the constant background odors would have faded into normal after a few days. Others argue, with great passion, that the combination of waste, animals, cooking fires, and cramped living spaces was an ever-present assault that no one could ignore. You, standing here in this moment, are leaning toward the second opinion. And here's a quirky tidbit you didn't expect. Some city dwellers deliberately carried small pouches of fragrant herbs, or even little carved boxes of scented wax, to sniff when the streets got overwhelming. Think of it as the ancient version of holding your shirt over your nose. You start to wish you had one right now. You pass a shop where a man is selling sandals. The air around him smells of leatherage, sharp, almost metallic hand. You find yourself oddly comforted by it. It's the first smell today that feels solid, dependable. But as you keep walking, the scent of fresh leather blends with something else, something sour and wet. And you realize you're nearing one of the city's drainage channels. You can't see it yet, but you can hear the sluggish trickle of water somewhere ahead. And you know, without wanting to know, that this is just the beginning of what your nose will endure tonight. The sound of that sluggish trickle grows louder as you keep moving forward, and soon the street slopes ever so slightly downward. You're drawn toward it, the way you might be drawn toward the sound of a fountain. This is not a fountain. This is the city's open sewer. It's not hidden. In fact, it runs right down the center of the street in a shallow channel, no more than a foot wide, bordered by rough stones. Every few feet, someone has placed a plank of wood or a couple of flat stones across it, creating little bridges so pedestrians can pass from one side of the street to the other without having to leap over the flow. And that flow, it's a mix of murky water, food scraps, stray feathers, and an oily sheen that catches the light in strange rainbow swirls. You don't linger on what the darker lumps are, but you have your guesses. Every now and then, something bumps against the stones and spins away half a cabbage leaf, a shredded piece of cloth, and, once, something you sincerely hope was just an oddly shaped potato. The smell hits you in layers. First, there's the ammonia sting that prickles the inside of your nose. Then, a damp, moldy heaviness that seems to cling to the back of your throat. And finally, an almost sweet, rotting undertone that's worse than the others, because it tricks your brain into thinking maybe it won't be so bad until it is. People walk by without a second glance. A woman with a jug balanced on her hip steps right onto a plank bridge, crosses the channel, and keeps moving, chatting with a friend, as if the air here isn't wrapping around them like a damp blanket. A boy trots past you, barefoot, splashing in the gutter without a care. You make a mental note never to touch anything with your bare hands again. Here is your historical fact of the moment. Many ancient cities actually relied on these open channels as a form of rudimentary sanitation. The constant flow fed by diverted streams, rain runoff, or in some cases, deliberately dumped household water helped carry waste out toward the city walls. The system worked in a sense, but it also meant that every street carried a reminder of just how human a city really is. A quirky little tidbit: in some wealthier neighborhoods, they tried covering the channels with wooden boards to contain the smell and prevent accidents. Sounds like a good idea, except the boards trapped heat and moisture, creating perfect little tunnels for rats to thrive. In fact, some merchants claimed they could tell the wealth of a district by the size of its rats. Historians still argue whether residents had any sense of clean in the way we understand it today. Was the goal just to keep the streets passable, or did people genuinely care about the smell? Evidence suggests both. Certain officials were appointed to keep channels clear of blockages, but fines for dumping waste directly into them were rare and often ignored. After all, where else was it going to go? You edge around a puddle where the channel overflows slightly, the water trickling across the cobblestones and drying in dark stains. The sun has baked this section of the street for hours, and the smell has intensified into something that feels almost visible. You can't help but imagine that if the city had colors for its smells, this one would be a deep, sticky brown with swirls of gray-green. Somewhere behind you, a vendor shouts about fresh melons for sale, his voice cutting through the heavy air. For a brief second, you think of turning back, escaping into the relative freshness of fruit stalls. But no, you're going deeper. And ahead, past the bend in the road, there's a faint, meteor smell starting to rise above the stink of the sewer. You already know what's coming next, and you're not sure if your stomach is ready for it. The street widens as you turn the corner, and suddenly the air feels heavier. It's warmer here, not just from the afternoon sun, but from the heat radiating off slabs of fresh meat strung up on wooden hooks. This is the meat market, the kind of place that, if you were hungry, might have been tempting, but right now, it's more of a test. Rows of butcher stalls line either side, each one shaded by strips of canvas or rough-hewn boards. The protection is mostly for the workers, not the meat. Flies hum in lazy spirals over everything, occasionally landing, occasionally crawling. You catch yourself trying not to look directly at the glistening cuts, because if you do, you notice the slight shimmer that says they've been out for hours, maybe all day. The smell here is a layered symphony: sharp iron from the blood pooling in shallow wooden troughs, the warm, fat, softened aroma of hanging lamb legs, and something faintly sour in the air that tells you some of this meat is only a few hours away from becoming entirely inedible. The butchers don't seem to mind. They work shirtless, knives flashing, sweat dripping, sawdust sticking to their arms. Sawdust, in fact, is everywhere, scattered across the ground to soak up spills. You notice dark patches where it's gone clumpy and sticky. When you step, the floor gives just slightly, like walking on a dry sponge. That's when you realize your shoes might never quite smell the same again. Historical fact: in many ancient markets, meat was slaughtered and sold in the same location, with little separation between killing, cleaning, and selling. Refrigeration didn't exist, so meat was sold quickly, or not at all. Customers often bought it the same day it was butchered. But in hot weather, even a morning kill could turn by nightfall. Here's a quirky tidbit: some cities had meat inspectors whose job was to sniff, poke, and occasionally taste test questionable cuts to ensure they weren't dangerously spoiled. The pay was terrible, the respect even worse, but the unofficial perk was free meat, which, given the job description, might not have been much of a perk at all. Historians still argue whether these markets were daily, weekly, or more seasonal in certain cities. Some evidence points to fixed butcher districts, while others suggest temporary stalls that popped up for festivals or market days. Either way, the smell of raw meat, especially in warmer months, would have been an unavoidable part of city life. You pass one stall where the butcher offers you a skewer of grilled meat, cooked over a small brazier. The smoky scent cuts through the raw tank of the air for just a moment, and your mouth waters despite yourself. You almost take it, until you remember that the skewer was probably sitting here, uncooked, just an hour ago. Behind the main row of stalls, you glimpse a low archway leading into a shadowy side street. A slow, steady, salty smell drifts from there, the kind that reminds you of sea air, except heavier, denser. It's a different kind of market, and if you follow it, you're going to find out exactly what happens to fish in the middle of an ancient city. You slip under the low archway, the light dimming as the stone walls close in. The air here is thicker, moist, almost sticky, and it carries a scent that's unmistakable. Fish, not the fresh, clean tints of a sea breeze, but the full-bodied punch of something that's been out of the water for quite a while. Stalls line this narrow passage, each one stacked with baskets of glistening silver bodies, scales catching what little sunlight manages to filter in. Some are neatly arranged on beds of wet reeds, others dumped in rough piles like someone appended a net and walked away. You notice the vendors keep splashing them with water from buckets, more to keep up appearances than to actually preserve them. The smell is layered here too. At the top, the saltiness hits first sharp and briny, like you're standing on a dock. Then comes the deeper, oilier scent of fish flesh starting to turn, heavy enough that you feel it in your throat. And finally, underneath it all, a faint sweetness that is somehow worse than both, a quiet warning that time has not been kind to this catch. A vendor waves at you, holding up a fat, pinkish fish with a broad smile. He's proud it's big, it's shiny, and it's only slightly cloudy-eyed. You nod politely, resisting the urge to breathe in too deeply. His stall is one of the cleaner ones, but a glance down the lane shows darker puddles gathering under other tables, where runoff trickles toward the gutter in thin, oily streams. Historical fact: in many ancient cities, fishmongers worked as close to the water source as possible, but inland towns relied on salted, dried, or pickled fish to make the journey. Fresh fish in a place like this meant speed-fast couriers, quick trade, and no time wasted. But speed doesn't stop nature, and in hot climates, fresh was often a generous term, quirky tidbit. Some sellers kept aromatic herbs on hand, bay leaves, fennel, mint, would stuff them into the fish esquilles, or scatter them on the display to disguise the smell. Buyers might even request this extra service to make carrying the fish home a little more bearable. You wonder if it worked, or if it just made the whole thing smell like herb rot. Historians still argue whether fish was a staple for ordinary city dwellers or more of a luxury, depending on proximity to coasts or rivers. Some point to abundant fish bones in archaeological digs, while others suggest these were the remains of market refuse, not everyday meals. Either way, the fish trade was a fixture, and with it came a constant undercurrent of salt and decay in the city's scent palette. A shout echoes from the far end of the alley, where a man is tossing small fish heads into a basket for some impatient cats. You follow the movement, noticing that beyond the fish stalls, the street widens again, and something even more pungent is seeping into the air. It's not meat, it's not fish, it's something sharper, more chemical, more animal, in a way that makes you think of wet hides and strong hands. You're about to walk straight into the tanner's quarter. The moment you step out of the fishmonger's lane, the air changes, though improves might not be the right word. It's hotter here, the sunlight reflecting off pale stone walls, and the smell, well, it's the kind that doesn't just sit in the air, it wraps itself around you. This is the tanner's quarter, where animal hides are turned into leather, and every part of that process has its own special way of assaulting your senses. The first stall you pass isn't selling finished goods. It's stacked with raw hides, folded over themselves, the edges still marked with tufts of fur. They glisten faintly in the sun, damp in a way that makes you take a step back. Next to them, barrels stand in uneven rows, each one filled with a liquid so murky you can't tell the color. A man dunks a hide into one barrel and stirs it with a stick, his arm slick to the elbow. That's when it hits you. This is the famous urine stage. Ancient tanning often involves soaking hides in vats of animal or even human urine to loosen hair and soften the material. It's a sharp, ammonia-heavy sting that clears your sinuses whether you like it or not. You breathe shallowly, but it doesn't help. The smell clings like an unwelcome hug. Farther in, you find the next phase. Scraping. A row of tanners hunch over stretched hides, pulling knives across the surface to remove hair, fat, and flesh. The motion is rhythmic: scrape, flick, scrape, flick, and every so often, a piece of gristle falls to the ground. You tell yourself not to look down. Historical fact: tanning was considered such a filthy trade that tanners were often forced to work on the outskirts of cities, downwind if possible. In some places, they were even excluded from certain public gatherings because their work left them perpetually smelling like the trade. Here's your quirky tidbit: tanners actually paid children to collect urine from public bathhouses or alleyways. The kids would go door to door with little jars, calling out for donations, and the full containers were sold to the workshops. It was an early form of recycling, just very specific recycling. Historians still argue whether the combination of tanning and other industrial trades in one district made cities smell worse overall, or whether spreading them out meant more neighborhoods suffered in smaller doses. Some records suggest wealthier areas insisted on keeping tanners far away, while poorer districts had no choice but to live side by side with the vats. You step around a puddle where a worker has just sloshed a bucket onto the street. It's a thin, yellowish stream that snakes toward the sewer channel, and you find yourself instinctively lifting the hem of your clothing just to keep it safe. Somewhere ahead, past the worst of the smell, a thin column of smoke rises and you realize the air is about to change again. This next scent won't be sharp or sour-riddle. Be thick, heavy, and impossible to escape. The smoke from 1,000 hearths is waiting for you. You follow the curling wisp of smoke, and with each step, the scent grows thicker until it's more than just a smell, it's a texture in the air. You're heading into a part of the city where cooking, heating, and industry all share the same fuel. Wood, sometimes charcoal if the household can afford it. And sometimes, well, let's just say people burn what they can get their hands on. The sky overhead looks slightly hazy, even though there's no storm coming. That smoke layer upon layer of its settling low between the rooftops. The streets here are narrower still, so there's less wind to carry it away. Every breath comes with a faint scratch at the back of your throat, and if you exhale slowly, you can taste it, bitter and almost metallic. You pass the first of many small hearths, just a stone opening in a wall, with a squat iron pot simmering over the flames. A woman stirs something thick inside, and the scent briefly cuts through the smoke, savory, rich, almost enough to make you forget the acrid sting in your nose. But it fades quickly, replaced again by the constant, slow-burning wood. Somewhere nearby, a baker's oven is at full heat. The scent of bread reaches you in warm, sweet bursts, but the trick here is that every nice smell is braided with the smoke. You can't separate them. This is just how the city lives and breathes. Bread that tastes faintly of ash, meat roasted in air that's already half burned. Historical fact: in ancient cities, the combined smoke from thousands of fires could create a permanent haze, especially in winter. Roman writers even complained of soot snow, flakes of fine ash settling on rooftops and clothing during calm days. Quirky tidbit: Cora residents sometimes burned dried animal dung when wood was too expensive. Not only did it produce a steady heat, but it also gave off a distinctly earthy aroma, one that your nose would learn to identify immediately. People claimed you could tell a neighborhood's wealth by the smell of its fires alone. Historians still argue whether indoor smoke was more deadly than outdoor pollution in cities without chimneys. Many homes vented smoke straight into the room before it escaped through a hole in the roof, meaning people, especially women, cooking, might breathe in far more than anyone passing by outside. A boy runs past you, his face smudged dark where soot has caught on sweat, and he disappears into an alley where the air grows hotter still. You follow, finding yourself between two rows of blackened workshop smithies, their forges glowing, hammers clanging in rhythm. The metallic temps in the air tells you the next part of the city will add another note to this strange urban perfume, hot iron, and all the strange smells that come with bending it into shape. The clang of metal reaches you before the heat does sharp, ringing blows that echo down the alley like a heartbeat with no sense of rest. Then the air changes again. It's hotter here, with waves of warmth that seem to press against your face. And underneath the lingering wood smoke, you catch the dry, almost peppery scent of hot iron. The first smithy you pass is wide open to the street, the forge inside glowing like a miniature sun. A man with arms like tree trunks pulls a length of metal from the coals, the end white hot and spitting faint sparks. As he works it against the anvil, you hear that perfect rhythm: strike, turn, strike, turn, and with every impact, the scent of scorched metal rolls toward you. It's not just iron you're smelling. There's charcoal dust drifting in the air, mixed with a faint, acrid temps from the occasional splash of water when the smith quenches a piece. That sharp hiss is followed by a brief burst of steam, and if you lean close enough, you can feel the humidity cling to your cheeks. Historical fact: blacksmithing wasn't just about weapons ancient. City smiths made nails, hinges, cooking tools, farming equipment, and even decorative work. The constant demand kept their forges running from dawn until well into the evening. Quirky tidbit: some workshops doubled as informal meeting spots because they were warm all year round. People would bring errands, gossip, or even small disputes to the smith, who might listen between hammer strikes. It wasn't unusual for someone to pick up a new kitchen knife and the latest neighborhood scandal in the same visit. Historians still argue whether ancient cities clustered trades like smithing together for convenience, or separated them to spread out the fire risk. In some places, the blacksmith's district sat near water sources for safety. In others, they worked deep in the crowded heart of the market. Moving past the main row of forges, you find a smaller workshop where the work is quieter, but the smell is stranger. Here, a metalsmith is shaping bronze, and the air is tinged with something sharper, almost medicinal. The alloying process, mixing copper with tin, has its own distinct odor, and the fine dust in the air catches the light in hazy streaks. You try not to breathe too deeply. Ahead, the street bends toward a darker quarter. You can already see the shadows closing in, and there's a dampness in the air that promises an entirely new kind of smellless fire. Well, you'll see. The city's canals and drainage channels are close now, and they have their own way of making themselves unforgettable. You turn the corner, and suddenly the heat and clang of the forges vanish behind you, replaced by a different kind of heaviness. The air here is damp, thick with moisture that clings to your skin, and there's a faint, echoing sound of water slapping stone. At first, you think you've stumbled toward a canal, but the smell corrects you almost immediately. This is the public bath district, and while it's cleaner than an open sewer, it still has a presence. Steam drifts lazily from a large domed building ahead, curling into the sky like a signal. The mingled scents of mineral water, oils, and far too many bodies in close quarters meet you halfway down the street. You step through the archway and are instantly wrapped in a warm, moist embrace. Your nose catches the faint, salty temps of sweat, but it's tempered by sharper notes: lavender, rosemary, maybe even thyme from herbal infusions floating in the heated pools. Somewhere nearby, a bath attendant is pouring scented oil into a copper basin, the smell rising in a silky wave. Historical fact: in many ancient cities, public baths weren't just for bathing. They were social hubs, business meeting spots, even places to seal deals. Some had elaborate heating systems that pumped warm air through floors and walls. Quirky tidbit: certain bathhouses offered skin scrapers, made from bone or bronze, which attendants used to literally scrape off dirt, sweat, and dead skin. Not only was it effective, but it was considered oddly relaxing for those who weren't squeamish about seeing what came off. Historians still argue whether public baths were more hygienic or more hazardous. Warm water and close quarters were perfect for comfort, but also perfect for spreading skin infections and parasites. The water here smells faintly of minerals, sulfur, maybe a trace of limestone. You imagine how the city's natural springs must have been prized, even before pipes and pools were built. The echoes of laughter and conversation bounce around the domed room, mingling with the constant splash of water as people move between basins. You catch sight of the cold plunge pool place, where bathers dunk themselves after sweating in the steam rooms. The shock of icy water might be refreshing, but as someone slips in, there is a small burst of smell like wet wool and old stone that reminds you not all scents here are pleasant. As you step back outside, the air feels suddenly cooler and drier, but you can already hear the music and rowdier voices drifting from the next street over, promising a different blend of smells. One's less about cleanliness and more about celebration. The laughter reaches you before the light does bursts of it, rolling down the narrow lane, mixed with the deep thump of some kind of drum. As you draw closer, the air takes on a richer, heavier tone. Roasted meat, spilled wine, and the faint, sweet burn of incense meant to disguise less welcome odors. You've wandered into the festival quarter, where feasts and celebrations don't wait for special occasions, they simply happen. In the flicker of torchlight, stalls line the street, each with its own scent, vying for attention. A spit turns slowly over an open fire, a whole animal goat, maybe, glistening as the fat drips and hisses into the flames. Someone is grilling skewers of fish nearby, the oily smoke rising into the night and mingling with the temps of pickled vegetables in open jars. And because this is an ancient city and waste disposal isn't exactly prompt, there is a faint undercurrent beneath all the good smells, something sour and stale that suggests last night's feast is still lurking in the gutters. Historical fact: large urban festivals often meant a temporary loosening of rules. Food vendors, musicians, and street performers would pack in together, creating a sensory overload that could be smelled from several streets away. Quirky tidbit: ancient tavern owners sometimes hung bunches of fragrant herbs over their doors, not just for decoration, but to serve as a smell signal to attract customers. Strong aromas were an early form of marketing. Historians still argue whether these public gatherings were more about religion or simply an excuse for community indulgence. Some festivals had deep ritual meaning. Others seemed to be little more than sanctioned chaos. A man carrying a basket of steaming flatbreads pushes past you, the smell warm and yeasty, almost buttery. You glance toward a nearby table where someone's pouring wine from a clay jug. The scent is sharp and fruity, with a faint vinegar. Note it's probably been watered down, as was the custom, but it still carries enough punch to loosen voices and stiff shoulders. You pause near a small crowd gathered around a juggler. Every time the flaming torches pass close to his face, there's a brief puff of singed oil. People cheer, the sound bouncing off the close walls, and somewhere in the chaos, you smell honey. It is coming from a stall selling sweet fritters dough, fried in oil and drenched in honey syrup, so thick it clings to your fingers for hours. You're almost tempted to stop, but the faint whiff of something less pleasant, a mix of sweat and too many bodies packed into a narrow space, nudges you along. Beyond the lights, the street grows quieter, the smells less crowded together. But the scent ahead is not cleaner, it's sharper, almost metallic. You are heading toward the butcher's row, and your nose already knows it. The city's night market has settled into its own rhythm, a quieter, more intimate atmosphere where street food stalls glow with flickering lanterns and the mingling scents of roasting, frying, and seasoning tease your senses. You follow the scent trail to a stall where a man carefully tends to skewers of meat turning slowly over glowing embers. The aroma of spiced lamb, garlic, and cumin drifts toward you, punctuated by the occasional flare-up as dripping fat hits the fire. Nearby, a vendor fries dough balls in bubbling oil, the smell of fried bread warm and comforting against the sharper smells around. Yet beneath these delicious fragrances, there's an underlying odor, the ever-present reminder of city life. The garbage pile just behind the stalls gives off a faint, sour taste that competes with the savory smells. a reminder that waste management is not exactly a priority here. Historical fact: many ancient cities held night markets to allow workers and traders to eat after long days. But the lack of refrigeration meant food safety was always a gamble. The best food was eaten quickly, and leftovers often attracted rats and insects. Quirky tidbit: some street vendors would sprinkle crushed mint or other herbs over their food to distract from the less appetizing smells. Nearby end, customers learned to expect this little herbal garnish as part of the experience. Historians still argue about how popular night markets really were, with some suggesting they were a luxury of larger port cities and others pointing to records of similar markets in inland settlements. Either way, the night air carried a mix of spices, smoke, and refuse that marked the city's after-hours personality. As you move past a group of merchants laughing over mugs of sour beer, a faint breeze shifts the scents, carrying a whiff of cinnamon and something else, something oddly sweet and floral. You look up to see a small stall decorated with garlands of dried flowers and herbs, offering teas and remedies for the weary traveler. You pause for a moment, taking in the contrast between the rich spices and the medicinal smells. The city may be full of sharp, unpleasant odors, but it also knows how to soothe itself, if only briefly, through scents that calm and refresh. Ahead, the street narrows again, and the scent shifts towards something earthier. You're approaching the market for herbs, roots, and medicines, the city's pharmacy, if you will. The air changes again as you enter the marketplace for herbs and medicines. Here, the scents are lighter, but no less complex. Earthy roots, dried leaves, crushed flowers, and pungent powders mingle in a fragrant, almost medicinal fog. Vendors sit behind tables covered with bundles of thyme, rosemary, and sage. Small clay jars hold mysterious powders, some sweet-smelling, others sharp and bitter. The ground is dusted with remnants of crushed herbs, and with each step, you stir up a soft cloud that tickles your nose. You watch a vendor grind dried lavender into a fine powder, the floral scent floating up like a gentle breeze through the heavier city smells. Nearby, another offers tiny sachets filled with frankincense and myrrh, prized for their fragrance and healing properties. Historical fact: many ancient societies believed strongly in the power of scents to heal, calm, or protect. Aromatherapy, in a primitive form, was common. Burning herbs, applying oils, and even wearing fragrant garlands were thought to influence health and mood. Quirky tidbit: some herbalists claimed certain smells could ward off disease or evil spirits. Rosemary, for example, was carried by soldiers into battle for protection, while myrtle wreaths were worn during festivals to ensure good luck. Whether these claims had any scientific merit is still debated. Historians still argue about how accessible these remedies were to ordinary citizens. Some say herbal medicines were common household staples, while others suggest they were costly luxuries, mostly enjoyed by the wealthy or religious elite. As you inhale deeply, you notice a faint bitterness underneath the floral and sweet aromas, reminding you that some of these herbs, though pleasant, also carry a warning. Too much can be poisonous, and the line between medicine and poison was often thin. Nearby, a woman crushes dried roots in a mortar and pestle, the sound rhythmic and soothing. The scent drifts toward you, a warm, spicy mixture that momentarily lightens the heaviness you've carried through the city's smellscape. You glance at your watch, or rather, imagine doing so, and realize that hours have passed. The city's scents have painted a vivid picture of life here, with every corner carrying a story written in aromas. But your journey isn't over. Ahead, the sound of hooves and braying animals draws your attention to the streets themselves, where creatures big and small share the space with humans and add their own unforgettable scents to the mix. You step back into the open streets, and almost immediately, the city's animal residents make their presence known. Horses clop by, their heavy hooves striking the cobblestones with steady rhythm, sending up small clouds of dust that carry a faint but unmistakable scent of sweat and hay. Goats wander near market stalls, nibbling on discarded scraps and occasionally bleating for attention. Their musk mingles with the city's general aroma, pungent, earthy note that's impossible to miss. Chickens scatter beneath carts, scratching at the dirt and leaving behind sharp bursts of feathers and feather scent. Stray dogs patrol the alleyways, their fur matted and carrying the smell of damp earth and leftover food scraps. They weave between legs, noses to the ground, eyes alert. You notice one pause and shake its head, sending up a faint cloud of dust and something sour. Historical fact: in many ancient cities, animals were not just companions or livestock, but vital parts of daily life, used for transportation, food, and even waste disposal. Their presence on the streets was a constant, unavoidable part of urban living. Quirky tidbit: some cities had official animal catchers tasked with managing stray populations or cleaning up after horses. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but it kept the streets from becoming completely overrun. Historians still argue how much animals contributed to the overall smell of the city. Some records suggest residents adapted to the mix, while others describe neighborhoods so overwhelmed that people avoided certain streets altogether. You watch a cart loaded with hay and barrels lumber past, the driver urging the horse forward with a sharp shout. The combined scent of sweat, hay, and leather lingers long after they disappear around the corner. You pause for a moment and realize that, among all the cities, smells the sewers, the markets, the fires, this is one of the few that feels alive. There's a natural rhythm here, a reminder that the city is not just stone and smoke, but a living ecosystem full of creatures, great and small. Ahead, laughter and shouting pull you toward the festival district once more. But this time, the sounds carry a different weight, the promise of scents, richer, more intense, and perhaps a little overwhelming. As you approach the festival district again, the air thickens with an almost electric energy, a mix of anticipation, sweat, and something more elusive: the wild, chaotic scent of celebration. Torches flicker, their flames casting shadows that dance along walls plastered with faded posters and pennants. The smells here are layered like a complex tapestry. There's the smoky tang of bonfires, burning wood and resin, mingling with heavy perfumes, some natural, others concocted from fragrant oils and flowers. Crowds press together in narrow streets, their bodies warm, breath mingling, and every movement stirring the dense air. You catch wafts of spilled wine, sweat-soaked garments, and the sharp zing of citrus fruits tossed as offerings or simply snacked on between dances. Historical fact: festivals in ancient cities were often multi-day affairs, involving processions, music, feasting, and rituals. They brought entire communities together, mixing social classes in ways the everyday city rarely allowed. Quirky tidbit: some festival goers carried small sachets of aromatic herbs or flowers to mask the smell of the crowds, or to ward off insects attracted by the light and noise. In some cases, these were traded like currency. Historians still argue about how these events affected city sanitation. While they were joyous occasions, the surge of people meant waste disposal systems were overwhelmed, and many streets became temporary cesspools until cleanup crews could catch up. You notice a group of dancers swirling near a fountain, their brightly colored clothes stained with spilled drinks and dust. The scent here is intoxicating: sharp musk, floral sweetness, and something spicy that reminds you of ginger or cinnamon. Nearby, vendors sell roasted nuts and candied fruits, their sugary aromas a welcome contrast to the earthier smells elsewhere. But no matter how festive the atmosphere, you can't escape the underlying reminder of the city's reality: the mingling of human life in all its rawness, good and bad, sweet and sour. As the festival continues around you, you realize this city's melly, chaotic, alive as a place where every breath tells a story. And you, for all your discomfort, are part of it. You move away from the festival's noisy center, stepping into a quieter neighborhood where the scents are softer, but no less telling. Here, the narrow alleys wind between small homes built of sun-baked bricks and timber. Each doorway a glimpse into daily life away from the bustle. The aroma here is more subtle: the faint sweetness of drying herbs hung from beams, the warm scent of bread baking in household ovens, and the faint smokiness from hearth fires that burn low as families settle in for the evening. Occasionally, the sharp scent of vinegar or pickled vegetables drifts past, hints of long-preserved food meant to last through the lean months. A dog barks somewhere nearby, its voice muffled by walls and shutters. Historical fact: many ancient homes had small courtyards where herbs were grown and food prepared, helping families add fresh flavors to their meals despite limited resources. Quirky tidbit: some households burned small bundles of dried lavender or rosemary to freshen the air indoors, especially during times when outdoor smells grew overwhelming. These early air fresheners were often passed down through generations as cherished traditions. Historians still debate how private life and public life smelled differently in ancient cities. While public streets were often harsh and noisy, the home could be a refuge, albeit one that still carried its own distinctive aromas. As the evening deepens, the sounds soften and the scents mellow. You find yourself breathing a little easier, wrapped in the gentle, familiar smells of hearth and home. Ahead, the faint sound of a flute drifts on the breeze, promising a final note in this journey through the city's scentscape. Something quiet, soothing, and deeply human. You follow the soft melody of the flute down a narrow lane where lanterns hang low, casting pools of gentle light on worn stone. The music feels like a balm after the city's harsher scents, wrapping around you like a warm shawl. The air here is cool and fragrant, with night-blooming jasmine and crushed mint leaves scattered along the pathway. The scent is delicate but persistent, mingling with the distant, comforting aroma of wood smoke from nearby hearths. You pause to breathe it in fully, feeling the tension of the day ease from your shoulders. This is the city's quieter side. It's moments of peace between chaos, where people gather in small circles to share stories, laughter, and sometimes tears. Historical fact: many ancient cities had dedicated spaces for evening gatherings, where music and storytelling were part of the social fabric, helping communities connect beyond the day's labor and noise. Quirky tidbit: musicians often carried small sachets of aromatic herbs tucked into their clothing, both to freshen themselves after long performances and to please their audience's senses. The practice was thought to improve concentration and soothe nerves. Historians still debate whether these evening rituals were accessible to all social classes or mostly reserved for the elite. Regardless, the legacy of music and scent combined endures in human culture worldwide. As the melody fades and the jasmine scent lingers, you find yourself ready to rest, your senses worn but enriched by the city's complex bouquet. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let the day's smells and stories ease you gently into sleep. The city's smells start to fade into the soft shadows of night. The harsh edges blur, replaced by gentle, comforting whispers of earth and wood. You feel your breath slow, your body sink deeper into calm, the weight of the day dissolving like mist. Imagine a quiet courtyard, bathed in moonlight. The air is cool but soft, filled with the faint, sweet scent of blooming flowers. A gentle breeze stirs, carrying a faint hum from distant voices and the rustle of leaves. The city that once buzzed with overwhelming scents now feels like a warm embrace, a tender lullaby whispered by ancient stones. The odors of smoke, sweat, and earth blend into something less distinct, less urgent. Instead, there's a quiet rhythm, soft footsteps on cobblestones, the murmur of a stream nearby, the faint flutter of wings as a night bird passes overhead. You re-wrapped in the gentle pulse of life that never truly stops but slows just enough for rest. Let your thoughts drift with the scent of jasmine and mint, fading slowly, like a candle burning low. There's no rush, no sharp smells to startle you here, just the deep, soothing quiet of a city finally asleep. And as you close your eyes, remember, this strange, smelly, beautiful city lives on, and so do you. End of script. Sweet dreams.